talking about supply. Let's just review what those were. So, demand is what? Demand is the inverse relationship between price and quantity. Inverse relationship. That means for a given good, as the price of that good gets lower, you or others, all of you, will demand more of that good. Okay? More to draw it out, look like this. Downward sloping, we call this demand. Now talking about supply, let me just put this over here. We've got price inversely proportional to quantity demanded. The law of demand, as the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. The law of demand, if the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Now we're talking about supply. Supply is the opposite of demand. That as the price for something goes up, you'll be willing to sell more of that thing. It's a direct relationship between price and quantity. Let's draw it out. Looks like this. Supply. Price is directly proportional. You all know what this symbol means? That's a proportionality symbol. As price goes up, here quantity demanded goes down. As price goes up, quantity demanded goes up. This was the last 2 weeks. In this class, we're going to be combining these two graphs, and then we'll see what happens. You can kind of guess at what it's going to look like. Because these two, the reason is, because these two graphs, they have the same axes, we can put them on the same graph. Specifically, we've got price, quantity, sloping up is supply, sloping down is demand. This is the famous supply and demand graph of economics. If you learn nothing else from this class, please learn how to draw this correctly labeled, and then just this one class. If you take away this one class out of your entire semester, you will know more economics than 99% of the population. This one class is drawing this graph, and then all the stuff that you're doing. So some things to notice immediately just about this one graph is that there is a point of intersection between supply and demand. We call this intersection the equilibrium. This is designated with a little asterisk. P star, Q star. This equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. What is equilibrium supposed to mean here? What does equilibrium mean? What could it mean? Yes?
At that point, the amount that's produced is the same amount that's wanted.
Yes. It's the same quantity demanded and quantity supplied. We talked about action a few weeks back and choice. When you're acting, that means there's something that you want to get but you don't have yet. You can be acting as a producer, you can be acting as a consumer. at the equilibrium, there is no more action. Everyone has gotten everything that they could have wanted to buy and everything that they could have wanted to sell. In the real world, are we ever at equilibrium? Not the full equilibrium, no. Sometimes you buy a thing, you regret it, you go back, you exchange it. Sometimes you buy too many things if you're trying to sell them later. Sometimes you buy not enough because there's not enough on sale. Even though we never reach this equilibrium for the whole market, you still get some equilibrium sometimes. For you personally, you go out and you want to buy some cereal, and you buy the last box of cereal, which is exactly the amount of cereal that you wanted to buy anyway. So at that specific moment, we've had the equilibrium of Cocoa Puffs and your desire to have cereal. At that instance, there is equilibrium for you and that specific store. But you know, if somebody else comes along later and they want cereal and the shelves are empty, then we're out of equilibrium. And we'll be talking about what that's going to look like as well. Drawing this line, you can see that we kind of have two triangles. Okay? This triangle here, above the line, we call this consumer surplus. Consumer surplus. It's a triangle-ish shape. Consumer surplus is all the benefits that these consumers above this price are gaining because the price was so low. All these guys would have been willing to pay a lower or a higher price, but because they're paying the lower price, this is the deal for the consumers above this line. You'd be willing to pay $50 for a ticket, but now it's on sale for 10. That extra bit that you would have been willing to pay, that's only your surplus. On the other hand, this triangle down below, we call this producer's surplus. There are all these sellers here who are willing to sell at a lower price. But the market price took over above what they were willing to sell, so they benefit too. I see confused faces. Please ask questions. Yes?
Can you explain the producer's surplus again? Why did
Producer surplus, there were producers at the bottom of this supply curve who were willing to sell at a lower price. But because the market price is above the price that they would have sold at, then they're making an extra surplus, benefits.
So they're benefiting from making at lower prices?
Benefiting
From selling at lower prices?
from selling at higher prices, from being willing to sell at a lower price, but being able to sell at a higher price.
Okay.
They would have sold at $10, but the market price is $50, so that extra $40 that they could have otherwise given up, that's their surplus. Yes? Consumer surplus is the benefit that those consumers above this line get. All these consumers up here, they were willing to pay a higher price than the equilibrium price. Because they're willing to pay a higher price, but they're able to pay a lower price, then they get an extra surplus. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Let's now got quantity, we got our supply, or sorry, our demand curve, and our supply curve. This is the equilibrium price, right? Now the government comes in and says, this equilibrium price is too high. The price is too damn high. We need a lower price. If the government comes in and says it is illegal to set a price above something, we call that price ceiling. The government comes in and sets a price ceiling below the equilibrium price. This is the price C for ceiling. The government sets this price. Yes? The ceiling is always below the equilibrium. The ceiling is below the equilibrium because the price wants to go above it, but there's a ceiling. Can't go above it. Make sense? Yes?
Why did they do that?
They just say the price is too darn high. The price is too darn high, we need a lower price.
So why do they think that?
For whatever reason. It doesn't matter. For whatever reason, they say the price is too high, we need a lower price. So they set this price ceiling. They set this price ceiling. At this price ceiling, this is the quantity supplied, and this is the quantity demanded. Is the quantity supplied equal to the quantity demanded? No. Which is more? Which is more? Yes?
The demand is greater than supply. The demand is greater than supply.
The quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. The quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. We call this a shortage. When QD is greater than QS. When the price is too low, so that the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, that is a shortage. Can anyone think of any real-life examples of shortages defined this way? Yes?
There's a big demand for masks right now, but they're selling out, so there's a shortage of masks.
Is it because of a price ceiling? Did the government come in and set a legally maximum price?
The Chinese government did.
Did they?
Yeah.
If they did, then that's a shortage. Any other examples? Yes?
Dollar beers.
Dollar beers. The dollar beer, I don't think it was, the government is trying to suggest to beer manufacturers you should. So that's, is there, I don't know, I don't drink beer. Is there always a shortage of dollar beers?
There are.
Are there? Okay, that's fair enough. Any other examples? Any other examples? Yes?
Would, if a company issues something that's limited edition, is that a shortage or is that something else?
That's something else.
Okay.
Limited edition means that they're making a limited supply of something. A shortage is a result of a legally mandated lower price. A limited run or limited supply, special editions. The reason companies do that is that they know that they can get those people at the very high end of the demand curve, so they'll get a higher price. Questions? How about price gouging laws during a disaster? Have you guys heard of this? Especially in countries where they have hurricanes, the government says that after a disaster, you're not allowed to raise your prices. When they say you're not allowed to raise your prices, what happens? the number of suppliers doesn't meet the demand, the quantity demanded. So you end up with too few of the necessary things. People will have to ration them through some other mechanism other than prices. Yes?
Does a price ceiling always result in a shortage?
Yes. If it is set below the equilibrium price. And that's the only reason that they would do it, is that they think that there's a price ceiling and they'll set it below the equilibrium price. Yes?
I think in the case of taxi cabs, municipalities actually set it higher.
We'll get to setting a higher price in a minute. Yes?
Or is smaller, just because producers don't think it's beneficial anymore?
Exactly. Why is the quantity supply lower? It's because there are, remember we made the market demand curve, or the market supply curve, was the sum of a bunch of different suppliers. The suppliers down here are profitable, but the suppliers above here are not profitable. They need higher prices. They need higher prices to be profitable. In a disaster, you can think if there was a disaster in Florida, people will drive, if the prices are high enough, people will drive from Virginia, from Oklahoma, all the way down to Florida. But they need to be able to sell at a higher price to cover their gas costs and maybe they're skipping out on work. Does that make sense? So that's a shortage. Now let's talk about a situation. We've got a price, we've got a quantity, we've got a supply, we've got our demand. This is the equilibrium. The price says, the government says prices are too low. Government prices are too low, so we need to set a higher price. So we call this a price floor. So this was price ceiling. This is now a price floor. Here is the quantity demanded, and at this price, we have this much quantity supplied. Which is more, quantity supplied or quantity demanded? Quantity supplied is more. We call this a surplus. And QS is greater than QD. The government says prices are too low, market prices are too low, so we're going to come in and we're going to set a legally mandated higher price. Prices can't go down below the floor. That's a price floor. That's going to cause a surplus. Producers come in and say, "Oh, prices are so high. Let me just bring in all my stuff for sale." But the demanders say, "I don't need that much." What are some real-life examples of this situation? Yeah?
In the dairy industry, the Ontario government sets a minimum of the price to be to encourage farmers to stay in business and use the dairy products.
Right. The dairy farmers here have a situation where they set minimum prices. And this minimum is above the market clearing price, the equilibrium price. Otherwise, they wouldn't need the minimum price. So we now always have surplus here. What's another example? Yes?
Would insulin be an example of price ceiling or price floor?
Insulin depends on what you mean. So insulin has typically we draw insulin as having an inelastic demand curve, but the government, but the price of insulin, we're talking about price ceilings and price floors, is what the government sets as the price.
Yeah, but wasn't there like a whole thing where the government like hiked up the price of it?
So in the United States, the government didn't hike up the price, but the supplier of insulin jacked up the price because they had patents and other privileges. That's not to do with shortages or surpluses. That's something else. We'll talk about that in later in the course in a couple of weeks. What's another example? Yes? Inflation is something else entirely. So this is, prices are there, and then immediately, one day the government comes in and just says, prices should be higher. That's not inflation. Inflation applies to the whole economy. This is just for one market. Yes?
Could we count like danger pay as a form of
What, sorry?
danger pay? So
Danger pay? Let's talk about wages. Minimum wages are an example of a price floor. What is the surplus in a minimum wage scenario? The surplus is unemployment. We got more people looking for jobs than employers are willing to pay at that wage. Here's something else about price floors. Not only so the demanders are employers, right? For wages, in the market for wages for employees, the demanders are people who are hiring, suppliers are workers. In a price floor, the suppliers are not only taking this fewer jobs than they would have otherwise, but they'll also be willing to accept fewer benefits. Right? If this is the total compensation, if the price covers the total compensation, not just your wage, you'll take this quote-unquote high wage, but you'll cut back on other benefits. If in a free market, maybe you would get free uniforms, but now you have to buy your own uniform. That happens. You work for somewhere and they say you have to buy your own uniform. I'll post the history of minimum wages on the my YouTube channel for the YouTube page for this lecture. But when in the United States, the people who advocated for minimum wages, they weren't ignorant of this phenomenon. They knew that there would be more unemployment. But they said the reason we want these minimum wages is because we want more unemployment. Why? Strictly for racist reasons. Before the minimum wage, in the 1940s, the black youth unemployment rate was approximately equal to the white youth unemployment rate in the United States, at about 9.5%. Today, you should all know, black youth unemployment in the United States, double digits, 25% plus. White youth unemployment is not as high. They knew this going in. They were not ignorant about these effects. Any questions so far on price floors and price ceilings? Yes?
Would you still have surplus and we're below or above equilibrium in shortage and
we wouldn't call it a shortage. There's just an excess. Shortage and surplus only apply when there's a price ceiling and a price floor, and it's legally mandated. Yes.
Do you have both sort of the same kind of minimum?
At the same time, no, that wouldn't make sense.
Okay, so you have like the need to be within this range?
They set ranges, but it would be either both ranges would be above or both ranges would be below.
Okay.
If they caught the equilibrium, then that's useless. Questions?
Price
Yes.
ceiling floors like this is only determined by the government, like they make the final call on what the price ceiling floor is? Like
Yes. It's a legally mandated price. It's a legislative price. So you could have situations where some producer tries to set the price above the equilibrium, but then they will have an excess of stock, and then they'll have to bring down their own price. And if they set the price below the market, then they'll have everyone coming in and they'll run out of stuff and they'll cut into their own profits. Any other questions? Okay. Now let's talk about something called quotas. Price quantity. Let's talk about quotas. Demand. Supply. Most of the time, when you think of a quota, what do you think of a quota? Yeah.
it's like a limit you have to meet.
A limit. In economics, typically when we talk about quotas, we talk about a limit on the quantity that's less than the equilibrium. So this would be the quota quantity. Suppliers can't sell more than that quantity. What will be the price when there's a quota? What will be the price when there is a quota? Yeah,
There'll be a price floor for it.
a price floor. So here is the price that producers are willing to accept, and here is the price that consumers are willing to pay. Where will the actual market price be? Will it be at PS, PD, or somewhere else? Yes.
Yes.
PS? Who's got another opinion? Why PS?
Well, you said that like the demand, like the consumers are willing to pay more than the prices, like suppliers are willing to sell, which limits the consumer.
The demand is up here. Consumers are willing to pay this high price. There's only so many goods available for sale. But there's so many, there are more people willing to buy at that price than there are consumers willing to sell at that price, at a lower price. So the price will be bid up to PD. Effectively, the supply curve becomes this new quantity. Something like that, and this becomes, PD becomes the price that they sell at. In this example, think of car quotas. If the government of Canada said that Toyota is only allowed to sell one car per year. Is Toyota likely to sell a cheap-ass Camry or their high-end Lexus? They can only sell one car a year. It'd be expensive. Yes?
They sell their Camry though, but the price of like something more expensive?
Yeah, so that's what they'll end up doing. The price of everything will go up. But they'll also be able to cut down on, they'll be able to charge a higher margin, right? The thing with luxury goods is that people pay disproportionately more for what they get for luxury goods. So they might still sell a Camry at a high, Camrys will sell at a higher price, but proportionally, a Lexus will sell at even a higher price. Housing in big cities is zoned. Zoning means in big cities that you're only limited to how much of the land you can build housing on. In Hong Kong, everyone says Hong Kong is so little, it's the size of the GTA basically. What percentage of Hong Kong are you legally allowed to build houses on? Shout out a number.
20%.
20%? 3%. Of the entire size of Hong Kong, you're only allowed to build houses on 3% of the land. And you've heard that prices of housing is high in Hong Kong? Yeah, it's because you're not allowed to build enough quantity to meet the demand. Same in Toronto. If you all been to Toronto, you see condos going up everywhere, right? High rises. What percentage of Toronto is zoned for high rises? Shout out a number. 15? 3%. 3% of Toronto is zoned for high rises, but the zoning follows the major intersections, and that's where all the other businesses are. So when you're traveling down the major streets, all you see are condos, you say, oh, the whole city must be filling up with condos. No, it's just the little area, the 3% of the area where all that stuff is legally allowed to happen. And then people are surprised that as more people are trying to move into Toronto, prices are going up. Don't be surprised. You can draw the supply and demand curve. Now we'll be doing some shifts. That's demand, that's supply, this is quantity. If this is the original quantity and the original price. Let's say supply shifts out. Suppliers find this new technological innovation, makes it cheaper to produce. Supply is going to shift out. That's the new supply. S prime is the new supply. What's going to happen to prices? Going to go up, down, or stay the same? Down. That's where the intersection is. What's going to happen to quantities? Up, down, or stay the same? Up. We get more stuff for cheaper. Price, quantity, demand, supply. Now demand is going to shift out. Say you found out that buying a thing is going to reduce your chance of cancer. Demand is going to shift out. If this was the original market quantity and the original market price. Is the new price going to be higher, lower, or the same? Who says lower? Who says higher? Higher. It's where the intersection of supply and demand is. P prime. Q prime. Demand shifts out. People are willing to pay more for the same stuff. You can see people are willing to pay more for the same quantity. If they were, in this situation, if they wanted this much quantity, they'd be paying more for it than they would otherwise. Questions on shifting out for demand or supply? No? What if P and Q, supply, demand? Now what if demand shifts in? Demand is going to shift in. This is S prime. If this was the original quantity and the original price, is price going to go up or down? Shout it out.
Up.
Up. Is quantity going to go up or down? Shout it out.
Down.
Down. Now we'll do a demand supply. Now demand is going to shift in. Demand is shifting in. If this was the original quantity and the original price, what's going to happen to prices? Are they going to go up or down? Shout it out. Down. What's going to happen to quantity? Is it going to go up or down? Down. Price goes down. Quantity goes down. Questions? Questions? Yes? Supply curve moves in. Say there was a fire at a factory, and now they have less capacity to build, so they can only produce so much now. So supply shifts in because there's fewer people building things. What would cause the demand curve to shift inwards? Yeah?
Find out like a product is harmful.
Okay, you find out a product is harmful, gives you cancer. In the supply and demand curve for tourism for Wuhan, China, what's happened to the supply and demand? Price, quantity. This is tourism, the market for tourism in Wuhan, China. This is where they have the lockdown right now. The whole city is under quarantine because of the coronavirus. If this was the original supply and demand, supply, what's going to happen? With the quarantine, no one is allowed in or out of Wuhan, China. Where's demand going to go? Is it going to shift out or shift in? Shout it out. Who says in? Who says out? It's going to shift in. So let me just draw this. This was the original quantity and the original price. What about the supply of tourism? Yes?
I have a question. If no one's allowed to enter, would demand just be zero?
You can make it 0, but that's simplified this way. But what's going to happen to supply? What's going to happen to supply? Is it going to shift out, shift in? People aren't going to work as much, right? People aren't going to work as much. Are tourism companies in Wuhan going to be able to produce as much as they used to? No. So what's going to happen to the supply curve? Is it going to shift out, shift in, or stay the same? Shift in. Supply curve shifts in. So what's going to happen to prices for tourist goods in China? Is it going to go up, down, or something else? It's going to go up. Who says up? Who says down? Who says something else? What's going to happen?
Well, if you're following the graph, but if you're just following the graph that's drawn there, like, it looks like it's going to stay the same.
Got a hand up?
It's gonna stay the same.
By this graph, it's going to stay about the same. But when both supply and demand curves shift at the same time, really we don't know what's going to happen. Because it's going to depend a lot on the specifics of the angles and the quantities involved. So that's why we focus mostly on one curve shifting in, the other stays the same. When both curves shift, anything could happen. Yes?
If we were just able to say though, like, because obviously you're not allowed to travel into the city and like, so there's no money coming in, like what could you show, like, technically since they're like, no,
So it's, in economics, we like to avoid saying there's never any, right? Because there are costs to enforcing. So even though there's a ban on traveling into it, there are still people getting in, right? So it's never ever 0. And one last question at all? All right. See you guys on